Imagine waking up in a frozen wasteland where the world you knew is gone. The Great Ice Age has ended, and the Earth is warming. But instead of safety, this new world brings chaos. Rivers shift, forests spread, animals vanish, and survival suddenly means learning entirely new skills. How did our ancestors not only endure this radical change, but thrive in it? Today, we'll uncover the untold story of how humans learned to thrive after the Ice Age. The Ice Age had lasted for tens of thousands of years, shaping every corner of the Earth. Enormous glaciers carved valleys, rivers froze into silence, and colossal beasts like woolly mammoths roamed the tundra. But then, almost suddenly in geological terms, the ice began to retreat. Temperatures rose, glaciers cracked apart, and seas swallowed coastlines. For our ancestors, it was as if the very ground beneath their feet was shifting. Imagine living on land that had always been frozen, only to see it turning into mud and rivers before your eyes. Entire hunting grounds vanished. Herds of giant animals, the backbone of human survival, began to dwindle or disappear. What once was a predictable frozen world turned into one of constant change, uncertainty, and danger. But in that chaos, opportunity appeared. Forests spread across areas once buried under ice. Rivers surged with fish. Plants flourished where none had grown before. Humans, scattered across continents, found themselves facing a new question. Would they cling to the old ways or invent new ones to survive? This was not just a fight against the cold anymore. It was the challenge of adapting to a living, changing Earth. And it would reshape humanity forever. As the ice retreated, the Earth entered a dramatic period of transformation. Massive lakes formed from melting glaciers, and coastlines shifted with every rise of the sea. To ancient humans, these weren't distant environmental events. They were daily realities. Campsites that once stood on safe ground could be drowned within a generation. Trails that guided hunters for centuries disappeared as rivers carved new paths, and with these changes came the disappearance of giants. The mammoths, mastodons, and giant sloths that had once been a dependable food source slowly vanished. Some scientists argue it was due to climate change, others believe overhunting by humans played a role. Either way, the effect was devastating. Communities that had relied on tracking herds across frozen plains suddenly had to face scarcity, but where one door closed, another opened. The disappearance of megafauna forced humans to notice smaller details in nature. Fish darting through rivers, nuts hanging from trees, or herds of deer moving through newly formed forests all became vital sources of survival. The vast, frozen simplicity of the Ice Age was giving way to a complex, unpredictable world. And in this complexity, the seeds of human ingenuity began to sprout. For humans living at the end of the Ice Age, survival meant watching the world more closely than ever before. The rhythms of nature became unpredictable. Seasons grew longer, shorter, warmer, or wetter in ways that no ancestor had seen before. Every change demanded quick adaptation, and those who failed to adjust were left behind. One of the most profound shifts was in movement. Hunters who had once followed mammoth herds across icy plains began seeking stability. Some groups moved toward the fertile river valleys, where water was abundant and fish plentiful. Others settled near the edges of expanding forests, where smaller game, berries, and roots could be gathered. The human lifestyle was slowly transitioning, from purely nomadic hunters to semi-settled foragers who learned to diversify their food sources. This shift also changed how humans thought about the future. Instead of chasing survival one season at a time, they began to notice patterns, how plants regrew each year, how rivers flooded at predictable times, and how animals followed seasonal migrations. These observations planted an idea that would one day transform humanity. What if we could shape nature rather than just follow it? The Ice Age had ended, but a new chapter of human history was only just beginning. When the Ice Age ended, humanity faced an identity crisis. For thousands of years, we had been master hunters of massive beasts, the mammoth, the bison, the giant elk. These animals were not only food, but culture, myth, and survival all rolled into one. But with many of them gone, the old way of life was collapsing. This crisis forced humans to do something extraordinary. Experiment. No longer could entire communities rely on hunting alone. People began gathering wild plants more seriously. Nuts, seeds, tubers, and berries that had once been overlooked. These foods were less glamorous than mammoth meat, but they offered reliability. Rivers, lakes, and coastlines also became lifelines. Fishing hooks carved from bone, nets woven from fibers, and even simple traps gave humans access to an entirely new food source, fish. But this was more than just survival. These experiments changed how humans thought about the world. For the first time, people weren't simply reacting to the environment, they were testing it, pushing its boundaries, and learning through trial and error. A bitter root might be poisonous, a roasted seed might become edible. Every discovery was a small victory, and each victory pushed humans further away from desperation and closer to innovation. The Ice Age hunters were evolving into something new, pioneers of adaptation. As humans experimented with new foods, they also began reimagining their tools. The simple stone spear that once brought down mammoths was no longer enough. Smaller, faster animals required sharper, more precise weapons, arrows tipped with flint, lightweight spears balanced for throwing, and traps designed to catch multiple animals overnight. Fire, 2 took on new importance. It wasn't just for warmth anymore. It became a tool for transformation. Roots that were inedible when raw could be roasted and eaten, nuts could be ground, seeds could be toasted, and fish could be smoked for preservation. Each new use of fire stretched food further, turning scarcity into opportunity. Humans also began to collaborate more closely. Sharing knowledge became essential. Which plants were safe, which rivers teemed with fish, which tools worked best. A mistake wasn't just a personal risk anymore. It could endanger the entire group. Survival demanded communication, teaching, and passing wisdom down from one generation to the next. What was emerging here was more than just new techniques. It was a mindset, the understanding that humans could adapt, reshape, and even outsmart the challenges of nature. The world after the Ice Age wasn't just testing human strength, it was testing human creativity. And creativity was quickly becoming our greatest survival tool. As survival strategies multiplied, human life began to look different from what it had been during the Frozen Age. Instead of endlessly following herds, some groups began to set up longer-lasting camps near rivers, lakes, or fertile valleys. These places offered a steady mix of fish, plants, and smaller game. Mobility was still important, but now moving was a choice, not always a necessity. This shift opened the door to something revolutionary: specialization. In larger groups, not everyone had to do the same task. Some focused on crafting sharper tools, while others learned which plants could heal wounds or which fibers could be woven into baskets. This diversification made communities stronger, more resilient, and more connected. Even art began to reflect this change. Cave paintings and carvings from this period don't only show giant beasts, they also depict fish, deer, and plants, proof that human imagination was expanding alongside survival tactics. The world was no longer about conquering giants. It was about mastering variety. In these small but powerful changes, humans discovered the key to resilience: adaptability. They were no longer just Ice Age hunters. They had become flexible survivors who could turn almost any environment into an opportunity. And this adaptability would soon set the stage for humanity's boldest experiment yet: the birth of farming. By now, humans had learned to survive in a world reshaped by melting ice, but survival alone was no longer enough. People began asking a new question: what if we could make food grow where we wanted it, instead of always chasing it? This idea was sparked by careful observation. For generations, humans had noticed that plants returned year after year in the same spots. Wild grains sprouted in river valleys, fruits ripened in familiar seasons, and animals grazed where grass was thickest. At some point, curiosity turned into experimentation. What if seeds were deliberately scattered near camps? What if water was guided toward them? Slowly, almost invisibly at first, the earliest steps toward farming were being taken. The change was profound. No longer bound to the endless uncertainty of hunting and gathering, Humans began building a relationship with the land itself. Fields of barley or wheat could provide stability that hunting alone never could. Communities stayed in one place, longer, building sturdier shelters and forming deeper social bonds. But this transition wasn't immediate. It was messy, risky, and full of trial and error. Farming wasn't an invention born overnight. It was the result of countless small experiments, passed down through generations. And those experiments would eventually ignite the greatest transformation in human history. As humans leaned into farming, the next logical step was to shape not just plants, but animals too. Hunters who once relied on unpredictable wild herds began to realize that some animals could be guided, fed, and even protected in exchange for a steady supply of meat, milk, or labor. Goats, sheep, and later cattle became some of the first creatures to live alongside humans in a new relationship. Domestication. At the same time, wild grains like wheat, barley, and rice were slowly transformed. People began saving the best seeds, the ones that grew bigger, tastier, or faster. Over generations, these choices shaped the crops into forms far different from their wild ancestors. Humans weren't just surviving off the land anymore. They were redesigning it. But with this newfound control came new challenges. Farming meant hard labor, clearing fields, guarding crops, and enduring the uncertainty of floods, pests, and droughts. It also tied people to one place more permanently. Once a field was planted and animals fenced in, moving away became costly. Still, the benefits outweighed the risks. A successful harvest could feed many more people than hunting ever could. And as food supplies grew, so did human populations. Villages swelled into larger communities, bound together by the rhythms of farming life. Civilization was no longer a distant possibility. It was already beginning to take root. With farming and animal domestication anchoring people to the land, something remarkable happened. Permanent settlements. For the first time in history, humans began building homes meant to last more than a season. Villages formed, often near rivers or fertile valleys, where life revolved around planting, harvesting, and tending herds. This stability created entirely new social dynamics. Instead of small mobile bands, people now lived in larger groups, sometimes hundreds strong. With more people came new roles: leaders to organize planting, skilled toolmakers to craft better plows, and storytellers to preserve knowledge. Their simple division of labor gave rise to cooperation on a scale never seen before. Trade also blossomed. Surplus food could be exchanged for stone, shells, or crafted goods from neighboring groups. Suddenly, humans weren't just surviving day to day. They were connecting, sharing, and building networks that stretched far beyond their immediate environment. Of course, challenges emerged too. Conflicts over land, competition for resources, and the dangers of disease all accompanied village life. Yet despite the hardships, the advantages of staying put outweighed the risks. Humanity had crossed a threshold. The era of Ice Age hunters was over. In its place stood something entirely new: communities capable of shaping not just their environment, but the course of history itself. The end of the Ice Age was more than just a shift in climate. It was the spark that ignited humanity's transformation. What began as a desperate scramble for survival in a warming, unpredictable world turned into a journey of adaptation, creativity, and resilience. Our ancestors watched their frozen hunting grounds melt into rivers and forests. They mourned the loss of giant animals that had fed generations, but they refused to give in. Instead, they learned to fish, forage, cook, and experiment. They crafted sharper tools, shared knowledge, and began to see the environment not as something to merely endure, but as something they could shape. From those first scattered seeds grew farming. From the taming of wild goats and grains came villages, and from villages came the blueprint of civilization itself. Humanity didn't just survive the end of the Ice Age. We used it as a springboard to thrive, to grow, and to become the builders of everything we know today. When you think about it, the world we live in, the cities, the technology, the very food on our plates, all traces back to that moment when the ice melted and humans refused to stop moving forward. So here's the question for you. If our ancestors could adapt so boldly in the face of chaos, what's stopping us from doing the same today? If you enjoyed this journey into our untold history, make sure to subscribe, share this video with someone curious about our past, and let me know in the comments which moment of human adaptation after the Ice Age surprised you the most. Because history isn't just about the past, it's a mirror reflecting what we're capable of tomorrow.